Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez, Nelson Mandela, leaders synonymous with civil rights movements around the world. In the 1970s, Judy Heumann, Ed Roberts, and other activists started a movement that swept the country. No longer willing to accept the status quo, they fought the United States government for the rights of people with disabilities and won. In her memoir, Judy Heumann, the only daughter of German Jewish immigrants, recounts life growing up in Brooklyn, the monumental 504 sit-in at the San Francisco Federal Building, and her illustrious disability activism career, affecting change around the world. Welcome to Behind the Book with Ability360 with Judy Heumann and her co-author, Kristen Joyner.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 4 Behind the Book with Ability360, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Kasey Kaler, and I am joined here by a few of my colleagues from Ability360. Today, we'll be talking with Judy Heumann and Kristen Joyner about the history of the Section 504 sit-in.
That Judy, the way Judy found Section 504 was sitting at home on a Saturday on her day off from teaching, reading policy, wading through pages and pages and pages.
504 would never have happened if it wasn't also for Kitty Cohn and many other leaders. And that's what's always important for me, is that people today understand that it is usually not one person. It's never one person that makes a movement. It really is the ability to bring many people together. And leadership is on many different levels, so there's leadership in local communities, within organizations, at the state, national, and all over the place. And I think we need to recognize leaders and their contributions, and not really, like Kitty, for me, I could have never done what I did without Kitty, because we were very close friends and we collaborated well, and we had similar but different views on things, and and Mary Lou Breslin and a bunch of other people. And it was not exclusively, but significantly disabled women that did a lot of the thinking and planning, and
and reached out across the borders to the other civil rights groups and developed allies and developed all of those really strategic alliances that had
been being developed before the 504 sit-ins. So, if you look at the work that CIL was doing, each in our own way, we were doing that on a regular basis. And I think that's one of the reasons that we were able to be successful. And it really was that, quite a number of us were, very fierce in our beliefs. When you hear Kitty give so I was in Washington, and the rest of the people went back to San Francisco. And when the demonstrations ended, Kitty is the one who spoke at the rally when they left the building. And, her ferociousness and her ability to articulate messages was astounding. And I think it was really, this, as Kristen says, collective ability for people to work together, that not just during the 504 demonstrations, but other incidents along the way, where you see the ability of people to come together and work together, plan together, dream together, and fight together, and support each other. None of us were going to back down on what was going on then. That would have been a big humiliation.
But one of the strategies was just built on relationships, right? When someone asked me what was one of the hardest things to write about in the book, and I said the committees, because Judy kept insisting that we write about committees, like, because there were so many different committees. There was this committee, there's committee to fight 504, save 504, and there was this committee, there's the committee over here, the national, the local, the DC, the San Francisco, there were so many committees, and my sense as a writer was, oh my God, if we write about all these committees, we're gonna lose the reader, right? Because as reader, you tend to think, oh, do I want to read? You sort of dismiss committees in your head as boring or dry or, like government, blah, blah, boring. But then but Judy kept saying, no, we need that committee and we need the name of the committee, and also all the sort of underlying structures. And then I realized the committees were really about decentralizing power and also building all these webs of relationships, which is ultimately how they succeeded. And if you look at really successful movements, like the movement that toppled Milosevic, it was also based on committees. It was all based on decentralizing power. It was dependent on the idea that there was not one central, like, charismatic leader that took all the credit and got all the attention. It was dependent on all of these, everybody feeling a sense of ownership over what happened and a sense of responsibility and a sense of connection to the larger goals. And so because of that strategy, they had to have the only way you can hold it together is through a committee, because that's democratic. That's a democratic way of doing it. So I think like all of those relationships they had in DC that they'd been building for years and across the country was what, that was about building a whole movement where everybody felt ownership.
So Judy, this question comes directly from Jim Lebrecht.
So Judy, you came into disability advocacy and activism at a very young age. Was this something that you felt that sometimes you had gotten yourself into something much bigger than you expected? And did it feel overwhelming, or did you feel like, oh my gosh, now here I am, I have no choice, I need to power through, or this is my calling and I'm really glad I was able to do it?
I mean, the reality of what happens in our lives is we go through stages, right? And so I was and still am drawn into getting engaged in problem solving. And so I think that was something that I was doing when I was like in high school or in elementary school, when I was class president of my special ed class of 8 kids. I mean, it was like nothing, but you had these elections. And then when I was in high school, because I went to a regular high school, but our homeroom was just disabled kids. And so, and then as I was getting older and, different things were happening, people will ask me, when did you see yourself as a leader? And I think it's just something, I see a lot of people as leaders. I've talked about this. And for me, in part, I feel like there's certain things that I like to do. Like I like to speak up and speak out. Other people like to write more and kind of be behind the scenes. But in reality, we're all leaders in doing that. So it's something that I think sometimes people say to me, you've never stopped doing it. And I think that's true. It's nothing that I kind of ever could put to the side. Stop working, stop, and I really can't do that. So maybe it's persistence. I mean, did I feel overwhelmed by my responsibilities? No. Do I feel overwhelmed, as I was just discussing? I don't know that I'd use the word overwhelmed, maybe once in a while, but for me, it's much more anger and sadness than feeling overwhelmed, and frustration. Why, from my perspective, why does it take so long to make certain changes that to me seem fundamentally right? What are our values for right and wrong? I said, I don't like the word overwhelmed, because using the word overwhelmed means you don't have any control, right? And I think we when we don't have control over everything, I would never say that. But I do feel like I don't use the word overwhelmed.
Okay, Judy, I have maybe a couple more quick questions from youth that we've gotten that I want to run through. The first question is from Calvin Cook. He's a member of multiple disability youth action groups in Phoenix.
Hi, Judy. During your adventures of self-advocacy efforts, what was it that brought you peace of mind? How would you attempt to relieve your stress and regain your focus?
Winning is always helpful. And winning doesn't necessarily mean that you get the grand prize. Winning is kind of thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve with, so there's a big problem, you're not going to address it and be successful, like Heumann community-based services, as an example. That's not going to change tomorrow. But being strategic, understanding both the stories, your story, the story of other people in your organization, in the community, really understanding what the arguments have been from the authorities that have responsibility for granting or not granting money and policies and regulations, and really feeling step by step that you are making progress and you are making a difference. And I think it'd be completely ridiculous to say that I feel very, I'm 72 years old, and it's painful in many ways to see the progress we haven't made. And I think, but we can't not keep making progress. And I think that's what this is all about. It's like, we have to be able to, buoy each other up. We have to, as I've been saying, really know that we're not just speaking for ourselves, right? That we represent many other people, and that many of those people are part of what's going on. And, I guess the saying, life is not a bowl of cherries. So, but I think, we have done some great work. And I think, look in your community and see things, how they were 5 and 10 years ago, and where they are now, and what role you and other people played, and documenting it. I think, one thing about Crip Camp that I feel is so important, and also the power of 504, which, is on YouTube, and it's that 18-minute piece of the 504 demonstrations. Document. Take film, try to figure out where things are going to be saved. Most of it will never be used, but the reality is having it and then potentially being able to use it. And you never know when it's usable, right? So, yeah. Another thing that I think is really important is getting disabled people to really authentically tell our stories. When Justin Dart went around the country asking people to tell stories about discrimination, when I read some of the diaries, I was thankful for the work that he had done. But when I read the stories, I knew that most people had not really, they were either afraid of discussing the kinds of discrimination they had experienced, or it was too painful to think about things that they had experienced. But I think, if you really sit down or stand up, whatever, think about incidents in your life that have occurred to you and how they made you feel at the moment, and then how they made you feel later, and what you've done to address them or not. That's when I think those authentic stories are important.